Good morning, Year 4. Another lovely day today. I think we could be seeing some signs of spring. Who knows? Fingers crossed. So, Will is realising that he needs to do something and he needs to look after himself and get himself out of the jungle. If you remember, um, let's just go over the last couple of pages. Yeah, he decided he was going to follow the river and try and eat and drink on the way down there and make his way down to sea. Okay. Tiger, tiger. But the very next moment something happened that changed my mind altogether. I was still sitting there by the river when I felt Una's trunk touching me softly on the back of my neck. It moved along my shoulder, snuffling at me, exploring me. I watched it encircling my chest, pulling at me gently, yet insistently. She was turning me round to face her. She stood over me for a moment, looking down at me, groaning at me reproachfully, as if she knew I'd been doubting her, as if she realised I'd been thinking of leaving her. She began to lower herself down onto her front knees. At first I thought she was probably tired after all her exertions in the river, and was just going to lie down beside me and rest. And indeed that is what she did. But it soon became apparent to me that this wasn't because she was tired at all. She was reaching out her trunk again towards me, curling it around my waist, and then drawing me towards her. It took a while for me to understand why she was doing this. Then I knew. She was trying to tell me. There could be no doubt about it. This had to be an invitation to climb back up. She was helping me all the way, nudging me, lifting me, supporting me, until I found myself astride her neck, sitting there behind the twin domes of her head. Until now I'd only really thought she had one dome at the top of her head, but now it was clear to me that there was two. Una heaved herself up, her trunk steadying me all the while until she was standing upright again on all fours. But without the howdah, there was no rail for me to hold on to. I panicked and threw myself forward onto her neck, clutching it. Then I found Una's trunk right there in front of me. She was offering it to me. She knew I had to have something to cling on to, and cling on I did. I dared not let go of it. Terrified she'd take it away, all I could do to make myself feel more secure was to grip hard with my knees and my heels. But I found my legs were too short and splayed too wide apart, so that any real grip was impossible. If Una's trunk wasn't there to hold on to, if she took it away, and sooner or later I knew she would have to, I could see I was going to have to rely almost entirely on balance to prevent myself from falling off. I really didn't know if I could stay on her once she began to move, and if she started to run, then I knew I'd be in real trouble. But to my great relief, when Una did begin to walk up on into the jungle, she moved only slowly. She took me on a gentle wander, meandering through the trees, and all the time her trunk was there for me to hang on to. I hung on tight with two hands, because at first, even though she was going so slowly, every step she took was nerve-wracking for me. But after a while, when I found I was still up there and that I hadn't fallen off, I began to feel my confidence growing. I was already learning how to attune my balance to the rhythm and sway of Una's walk, and what I was beginning to sense as well was that she was adjusting her walk to me all the time, that she was teaching me, helping me, that she would not let me fall. In no time at all I found I was more relaxed, that I was enjoying riding her again. I was beginning to look around me at the parrots flying through the forest, cawing at me, squawking, cackling, then at the dizzying heights of the trees and the sunlight filtering through. It wasn't long before I trusted myself enough to take one hand off her trunk, and for a few moments even two. She left her trunk there for me all the same, which was just as well because my newfound bravado was more fragile than I thought. More than once when I became too overconfident, my balance failed me, and I did come very close to falling off. But each time this happened, and I didn't fall, it gave me a new self-belief that I could do this, that I could stay up there, that Una would always do what she could do to look after me. As soon as the fear of falling left me, though, my hunger pains came back, sharper and more insistent than ever now, gnawing at my stomach, and as the hours passed I began to feel an irresistible weakness coming over me. I could feel that the little strength I had left was fast draining away. I forced myself to concentrate harder, told myself that I mustn't loosen my grip on Una's trunk, but my head was swimming now. I felt I might lose consciousness and slip off at any moment. Sometimes I couldn't work out whether I was daydreaming or sleeping. I kept imagining I was in the aeroplane with Mum, that I was asleep beside her and dreaming I was riding an elephant along a sandy beach, with Mum running alongside taking photographs of me and telling me to smile and to wave. Time and again I came out of my daydream to discover that this was only partly true. I was riding on an elephant, but Mum wasn't with me. I was in a jungle, not on a beach, and I kept wondering where Mum was. I called for her, but she never answered. I was so weak by now that I could barely sit upright at all. I have no idea how long I rode up there, in and out of my dreams, only that the sun was above me sometimes, and then the moon, then there was rain, and heat, and flies, but always Una's trunk would be round me, holding me up there. Then once I woke, there was suddenly no trunk to hold me steady, no trunk to cling on to. Una wasn't walking anymore, she was standing still, her ears wafting slowly. With no trunk to hold on to, I took fright at once. I gripped tight with my knees and legs, threw myself forward onto her neck and clung there. It was some moments before I had the nerve to sit up again and look to see what Una was doing. All I could see at first was the blinding glare of the sun shafting through the canopy above. Then I saw them. Figs. Dozens of them, hundreds of them, hanging there above us. And Una's trunk was reaching out to wrap itself round the branch and pull it down towards me. Food! Food at last! Una had understood. For an elephant, this may have been an average meal. For me, it was a fabulous feast. I gorged myself. Nothing had ever tasted this good. Not fish and chips, not the best beef burger in the world. Una was eating the figs a great deal faster than I was, of course, but I was doing my best to keep up, peeling the next one at the same time as I was trying to finish eating the one before, and while trying to swallow that one before that, I was stuffing them in. Una seemed quite happy to reach up and pull yet another fig-laden branch down for me whenever I reminded her, and this I did often, again and again, until the time came when I knew I could eat no more. But Una's appetite for figs was insatiable. I looked on in awe and admiration as she stripped the tree of the last reachable fruit. Clearly, this was just a starter for her, because when she had done with the figs, she set about stripping a nearby tree of its leaves and twigs as well. They all went into the munching machine together. There was a rhythm about her eating that I found almost musical, from tree to trunk to mouth, from tree to trunk to mouth, accompanied all the while by the sound of those great grinding jaws, and a constant groaning drone of contentment from somewhere hollow deep inside of her. All of this did go on for a rather long time, long after I'd ceased to find it all fascinating. Soon I had more urgent concerns. I really did need to get down. I couldn't put it off any longer. I kept telling her I needed to go to the bathroom, as Grandma had always insisted I called it, but Una wasn't at all interested what I wanted, because Una was eating, and I knew by now that nothing was going to interrupt that I was in for a very long wait, and there wasn't a thing I could do about it, except to try and think of something else. But that didn't work either. Only when she'd eaten her fill did she at least pay me some attention, and it was only just in time. This was one of the reasons why, from then on, as the days passed and the weeks, as the rains came and went, I chose more and more not to ride upon Una, but instead to walk alongside her, particularly when the jungle was not so dense around us. Sometimes it looked quite impenetrable, and then I always rode because nowhere was impenetrable, I discovered, to Una. Riding upon Una, or with her behind me, beside me, or ahead of me, I felt no fear whatsoever. She was the queen of the jungle, I could see that. The gibbons that swung and sang through the trees seemed to be doing it just for her. Toucans flew overhead from tree to tree above us, an escort in scarlet uniforms and yellow bills. Bright blue peacocks strutted close by, sounding out their raucous fanfare. In fact, the whole jungle, it seemed to me, was welcoming her, celebrating her arrival. Sometimes she would trumpet back her response in appreciation, perhaps, or simply just to announce her arrival as she went. Then one day, high above us, swinging through the branches of the forest canopy, I saw the dark and distant shape of my first orangutan, watching us, following us, keeping his distance. Like this orangutan, so many of the forest creatures looked down from a respectful distance, obviously intrigued by the awesome giant that was meandering majestically through their world. But they seemed to understand that her presence among them was entirely benign, and she posed no threat whatsoever. None of them ran away at our approach, only the insects, and these came in all sizes and colours and shapes, but all of them, it seemed to me, had an insatiable appetite for blood, whether elephant or human, and they showed Una no respect whatsoever. And that was another reason why I so often decided to go on foot, because in the end I found that the further I was from Una, the less the flies bothered me. But there was a downside to this: leeches. I soon discovered that the more I walked, the more exposed to leeches I became. They would attach themselves to me without knowing it, mostly to my legs, where they would feed on me surreptitiously until I discovered them. I learned to loathe these hideous, blood-sucking slugs more than anything in the forest, more even than the flies. They were drinking me alive. I could see my blood pulsating inside them. It disgusted me to have to look at them, and it was worse still to have to deal with them, but I had to. Every time I prized them off, I found a sharp-edged stone was the best leech remover. I had to force myself to do it, sometimes several times a day. Compared to leeches, not even the snakes bothered me, however menacing they looked. Large or small, all of them made way for Una. One look at her and they slithered away into the shadows. They were no real trouble. So to walk alongside her was all the snake protection I needed. Even the crocodiles kept their distance. But I did notice that Una took no liberties with crocodiles. There was a mutual respect here. She would always pause and wait for me to get up and ride on her whenever we came to a river or a swamp. I needed little persuasion. I recognised by now that Una knew well enough what was safe for me and what was not. I had come to trust her judgment implicitly. As we wandered on ever further, ever deeper into the jungle, the rains came down more and more often, not rain as I'd known back on the farm in England, but sudden and thunderous on the canopy of the leaves above me, so loud that the noise of it drowned out all of the whooping and whirring of the forest. When it came, both Una and I were instantly soaked to the skin. We might have been shielded to some extent by the dense canopy above us from the full force of each downpour, but if we ever emerged into the smallest of clearings, the rain fell on us with such violence that it hurt. Sometimes it felt more like warm hailstones than rain. In time I found out that the only effective protection from the ferocity of the storms like these was to tear off a great leaf from a tree and hold it above my head like an umbrella. I felt quite clever doing it too. I once told Una, "I'll do the same for you, Una, only there isn't a leaf big enough, is there?" I talked to her more and more often now. My chatter became a kind of running commentary, a mishmash of all my observations and feelings, jokes even, whatever came into my head at the time. I found that talking to Una came to me quite naturally. I felt that she liked me to talk. She liked the sound of my voice. There was that she was listening because she liked me to be there, because we had become friends, proper friends who trusted one another. There was a lot I'd come to love and respect about this elephant, especially how nothing seemed to perturb her or irritate her. Flies she simply dealt with by wafting her ears or shivering her skin. Rain or sun, it didn't seem to matter to her. Only that once when she had run from a tidal wave had she ever shown any fear whatsoever. Nothing since then had seemed to upset her at all. She ambled on through the forest, aware of every creature around her, utterly unafraid. I did think sometimes that this might be because her mind was always on her stomach. Una was on a perpetual quest for food, browsing constantly as she went, whether in the midst of a downpour or not, her trunk reaching out to explore the branches ahead of her, searching out the most succulent leaves, the ripest fruit. If the fruit on a likely-looking tree was too high and inaccessible, she'd simply push the tree over, or pull a branch down and break it off. If a fruit was too hard, she seemed to know how to crack it, open it, or break it apart with her trunk or teeth. No fruit was ever too awkward for her. I loved to watch her trunk at work, almost, it seemed to me, with a mind of its own. I wondered at how skilful and delicate an instrument it could be, how powerful, how sensitive, how infinitely manoeuvrable. Downpours in the jungle could go on for days at a time, I discovered, and they could stop as suddenly as they'd begun. For me, this moment always came as a great and welcome relief, leaving the jungle steaming and dripping around us, and slowly finding its musical voice again, all the whooping and the howling and the croaking, joining together in unison to celebrate the end of the storm. This jungle chorus was so familiar to me by now that I missed it when I was not there filling my head. I felt that the forest was soaking up its own music, as well as all the rain that had fallen, as if it was a living, breathing sponge. There were times now when I thought that in some strange way I was being soaked up too, that I was fast becoming part of a gigantic, all-consuming sponge. It was easier to talk to Una when I was not competing with the thunder of rain. I had long since abandoned any idea of teaching Una some understanding of English, because I had come to realise as time passed that Una did not need to know exactly what words meant, but she understood everything quite instinctively without the need for language at all. After all, no one had told her that a tsunami was on its way. She'd just known it, and long before anyone could ever see it too. Without being asked, hadn't she knelt down for me and taught me how to climb onto her back, how to ride her, how to feel safe about her? Yes. The more I thought about it, the more I believed that she knew absolutely which fruit was right for me to eat, and therefore which fruit was not. And maybe what water I could drink too. She'd been looking after me all along, not because I'd told her to, or what to do, or how to do it, and certainly not because she understood my language. This elephant was knowing. She was intelligent, thoughtful, and deeply sensitive to my needs. It was becoming clearer to me with every day that there was nothing whatsoever I could teach her, that it was in fact she who was teaching me. My actual words in themselves might have meant little to her, but I knew for sure that she was listening and that she understood the feeling behind them, the gist of what I was trying to tell her. That was enough for me. Besides, I needed someone to talk to, and I have to admit that I talked to her also because I liked to hear the sound of my own voice in this place. Everyone else had their own voice in the jungle, so why shouldn't I have mine? I knew I must be repeating myself all the time, but Una didn't seem to mind that. In those early days in the forest I would keep coming back again and again to what was still troubling me the most, despite every attempt to put it out of my mind. It helped me to speak about it, to have someone to tell. I'd always begin my monologues in much the same way. Una, are you listening? Even as I was saying this, I knew that it was silly to say it because she was always listening. I've been thinking a lot, trying to sort things out in my mind, you know? There's no point in trying to find my way back. I can see that now. What would I go back for anyway? Mum's not there. I still keep hoping she might be, but I know she's not. And Dad's not there either. I keep thinking about them, and I mustn't. I keep talking to you about them, and I mustn't. It's like Grandpa said. I've just got to put a plaster over it, and it'll get better. He was right about that, Una. Grandpa was right about a lot of things. I've got to put Mum and Dad out of my mind. But then if I do, I'll forget them. And I don't want to do that. Not ever. They'll always be my Mum and Dad. I cried a lot as well when I told her these things. I think she understood about death and about grief too. You know when I'm really sad and down in the dumps, Una? Don't you? You know, don't you? I don't like to talk then, do I? No, that's because I'm crying inside. And you can't talk when you're crying inside. When I'm like that, I don't care whether I live or die. But I have to care, don't I? Because if you don't, you'd give up and die. So that's why I have to keep telling myself and telling you, I've got you instead. You're my family now, Una. My home isn't in Salisbury anymore, or down at the farm with Grandpa and Grandma in Devon. It's here in the jungle with you. Wherever you take me, that'll be my home. Wherever you go, I'll go. And I won't mind where that is. Honest, I won't. Just so long as you feed me lots of figs, and just so long as you don't ever leave me. You and me, Una. We've got to stick together, right? Promise? I love you, Una. That's more or less how I'd ramble on to her. Above all, I always wanted to remind her that I loved her. I'd tried to remember to tell her the last thing at night before I went to sleep. Mum had always told me the same thing at bedtime. Dad too when he was home. I always loved them saying it, and now it comforted me to be saying it to Una each night. It helped me put the past behind me and come to terms with my new life in the jungle with Una. Of course, I didn't expect any response from her, or to anything that I said. I did think sometimes that an occasional "love you too" would have been nice, but it never happened. There was one time though when she did reply in a sort of way, in a most surprising way actually. I'd just said my "good night, love you" when she let out the longest, loudest farts that I'd ever heard in all of my life. I'd known her long enough now to know that she was a fragrant farter, and a frequently one at that. But this particular one was truly the most magnificent fart of all farts, and musical too. One that seemed to go on and on and on. I could hear my own giggling echoing through the trees long after I'd finished. I remember I'd always giggled with Bart and Tonk and Charlie when someone let one off in school assembly, even when we knew we'd get in trouble with Big Mac. I don't know why, but when it came to farts, I was a helpless giggler. I could never stop myself. Now out here in the jungle, there was no need to stop myself. No Big Mac to keep me in at playtime. There wasn't any real need to stop myself either when my laughter turned to tears, as it so often did since I'd been in the jungle with Una. I could tell it upset her when I cried, so I did my best not to. I promised her so often that I wouldn't cry, but it was a promise I was still struggling to keep. I went on promising her all the same, because I knew that one day, if I promised it often enough, it would help me to make it happen. I'm not going to cry, Una, I had told her, the trunk between my hands close to my eyes. And I'd tell her yet again, I'm not going to think of them. I mean it this time. I really mean it. I promise, I promise, I promise. Every night during those early times with Una, I tried to keep that promise, and there were many nights when I failed. There were no weeks or months for me anymore, not in this place, only days, and the long, long nights. Whenever I saw a glimpse of the moon through the trees above, I'd think about where I'd seen it before, through the window at home, out camping with Dad. It was these nights I hated the most, for it was then that, however much I tried, the old griefs would come welling up inside me. All I could do was give myself up to tears. In some strange way, though, I found the discomfort of having to sleep rough in the jungle each night did help to distract me from the sadness I was trying so hard to forget. In the first place, I had to concentrate all of my mind on making myself comfortable, on collecting and piling up a bed of leaves to lie on, always close enough to Una, but not so close that I'd have to share her flies. I had learned from a bitter experience by now that the damp of the ant-infested, leech-infested forest floor was no place to spend a night, so I did spend a lot of time and trouble every night making myself a substantial nest of leaves, preferably of the damp forest floor, and some nearby rock if possible. But even so, I could never get to sleep easily. I couldn't forget the jungle around me, what dangers might be lurking, even though Una was right next to me to protect me. But on some nights all of these fears, even my grief, were dwarfed by the constant battle I fought with the insects that came alive in the dark and whirled and hummed and buzzed around me. However much I slapped and swiped them, they just kept on coming, back to have another go at me. Sooner or later, I knew, despite all my best efforts to make a bed inaccessible to the ants and leeches, they would find me out, creep up my legs and feed on me, whether I was awake or asleep. And then there was the din. We'll pause there. Hard work living in the jungle. It's good job we've got these lovely houses to live in, isn't it? Right, that's the last one for this week. I shall see you on Monday. Enjoy your weekend. Bye for now.